The human spaceship was exploding in flames, torn to shreds by the laughing Evora fleet's superior weapons. Everyone in the dingy bar could hear the pilot's tortured screams over the fuzzy video feed from the battle, and the patrons' faces were drained of color. Geoffrey Crawford sat at the bar, quaffing back Corleone ale, his battle-worn hand gripping the glass tight enough to crack it. He kept his eyes on the feed, even as the station rotated and the vid flickered out, replaced by the void of space and distant stars out the window. Stars that used to belong to humanity. Now they belong to the Evora. "Lieutenant Crawford," a trembling voice asked from behind him. Geoffrey craned his neck, spotting a fresh-faced cadet who couldn't have been a day over 20. The kid was fixated on the gold captain's bars on Geoffrey's uniform and the medals weighing down his chest. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but, well, is it true that you fought in the Evora War?" "What's left of it?" Geoffrey grunted, gesturing to the empty stools around him. The bar used to be standing room only, packed with the men and women serving aboard the orbital defense platforms. Now it was a mausoleum, with more ghosts drifting in the debris field outside than living patrons. He caught the eye of the bartender, Fizz, who wordlessly brought him a refill. The cadet slipped onto the stool next to him, transfixed. "I grew up hearing the stories, sir. They say we had the Evora on the ropes until their reinforcements arrived." Geoffrey drained his glass again, relishing the burn in his throat. Easier to focus on that than the memories. Their subspace sensors picked up our distress calls to Earth, led them right back to the homeworld. He still remembered Grand Admiral Zolok's smug face as he broadcast his demands for surrender. The cadet swallowed. "So it's true, then, they've conquered Earth?" "Not yet." Geoffrey's hand reflexively dropped to the lumpy part of his jacket, feeling for the data crystal hidden in the secret pocket. The Evora had underestimated humanity for the last time, but unless our secret fleet can break their blockade, it's only a matter of time. Geoffrey leaned back on his stool, his eyes distant as he relived the memories. I'll never forget the day the Evora hit Proxima Centauri. It was a goddamn massacre at first. Their warships jumped in and started blasting everything in sight. The colony's defenses were a joke against that kind of firepower. He took a swig of his drink, his face grim. But then something unexpected happened. The colonists, they didn't just roll over and die. They fought back with everything they had. Improvised bombs, guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks. They made the Evora bleed for every inch of ground. The cadet's eyes were wide. "How did they manage that, sir?" "2 words. Colonel Marek." Geoffrey's mouth twisted into a smile. He was the mastermind behind the whole resistance, organized the civilians, trained them to fight, kept the Evora chasing their tails for weeks with his strategies. "Colonel Marek, I've never heard of him." Geoffrey chuckled. "That's because he wasn't human, son. Marek was Evora through and through, but he'd had enough of his people's cruelty, saw something in us worth defending, so he turned his back on the Evora and threw in with the colonists." He shook his head, marvel in his voice. "With Marek's inside knowledge, we started winning, picked apart the Evora's tactics, exploited weaknesses in their tech. Suddenly, it wasn't just Proxima holding out, but a dozen other colonies too." The cadet leaned forward, hanging on Geoffrey's every word. "So we were winning?" "For a while, yeah. But the Evora still outgunned us by a wide margin, and they were pissed, started going after our supply lines, choking us out." Geoffrey's hand tightened on his glass. "That's when Command pulled out our trump card, the one thing the Evora never saw coming." "The Phantom Fleet," the cadet breathed. "But I thought—" "That it was a myth." Geoffrey barked a laugh. "Oh, it was real, all right. Had to be for what we were about to pull off. See, the Phantom Fleet was our ace in the hole, and it was damn well going to turn this war around. The Evora were in for a hell of a surprise." Geoffrey leaned forward, tapping the weathered bar with his cybernetic finger. "It took decades to develop the tech, and cost more than the GDP of most systems. But if the Evora knew what we were cooking up, they'd shit their exoskeletons." The cadet's eyes bugged out of his skull. "Decades? How the hell did you keep it under wraps for that long?" A wry grin tugged at Geoffrey's scarred face. "Compartmentalization, son. It's amazing what you can achieve when the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing. We had cells working on each component, propulsion, weapons, stealth, scattered across 100 planets. They never saw the full picture. He drained his glass, signaling fizz for another round. Even the shipyards were hidden, tucked away in the ass-crack of space. Asteroid belts, nebulae, you name it. If there was a sensor dead zone, we had a base there. The cadet shook his head in disbelief. And the crews? Hand-picked, the best of the best, sworn to secrecy on pain of death. We put 'em through training that would make a Krell Marine cry for mama. Jeffrey's eyes took on a faraway look. I remember the first strike like it was yesterday, an Evora supply depot, fat and happy, thinking they were untouchable. He chuckled darkly. They never saw us coming. 1 minute all quiet on the space front. The next, a dozen ships materialize out of nowhere, pounding them with EMP blasts and kinetic rounds. We were in and out before they could even think about mounting a defense. The cadet let out a low whistle. I bet that put the fear of terror into them. More like confusion. They couldn't believe that us primitive apes had developed tech that advanced. It just didn't compute for them. Jeffrey leaned back, cracking his knuckles. But that was just the appetizer. Over the next few months we hit 'em where it hurt. Command centers, shipyards, supply lines, anything that moved we blew into scrap. Our ships were small, but they were fast and packed a punch. We could dance around those lumbering Evora battleships, pecking away at their weak spots until they fell out of the sky. He shook his head, a note of pride in his voice. Slowly but surely we were turning the tide. For the first time there was hope that we might just pull this off. His face darkened. But the Evora, they were a wily bunch. They had one last card to play, a Hail Mary to crush us once and for all. Jeffrey's brow furrowed as he continued, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. The Evora were desperate, backed into a corner. They knew the Phantom Fleet was turning the tide, so they played their trump card. A planet killer, a ship armed with a weapon that could tear a world apart. His eyes met the cadets, holding his gaze. They aimed it at Earth. One shot and they'd shatter humanity's spirit, break our will to fight. But they didn't count on Marek. The cadet leaned forward, hanging on every word. What did he do? He infiltrated their ranks, rose high in their military. And when he learned about the planet killer, he knew he had to act. So he stole a ship and ran, racing to warn Earth. Jeffrey's hand tightened on his glass. But the Evora were on his tail, chasing him across the stars. Marek was always one step ahead, but barely. They were determined to stop him, to keep their plan secret until it was too late. "Did he make it?" the cadet asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jeffrey nodded, his eyes distant. He did, but it cost him. By the time he crash-landed on Earth, he was half dead, his ship a wreck. He delivered his warning with his last breaths. He paused, the silence heavy. We mobilized everything we had, the Phantom Fleet, every ship, every soldier. We knew this was it, our last chance. We had to stop that planet killer, no matter the cost. His eyes met the cadets once more, burning with intensity. And so, over Earth, we gathered for the final battle. The Evora threw everything they had at us. We fought with everything we had. We fought for Earth, for every human colony, for our very existence. Jeffrey's voice dropped to a whisper. It was a battle like no other. Ships burning, soldiers dying by the thousands, the planet killer looming over it all, ready to fire. We threw ourselves at it, wave after wave, trying to break through their lines and take it out before it was too late. He fell silent, his gaze turning inward, lost in the memories of that desperate, fateful day. Jeffrey's voice trembled with raw emotion as he recounted the cataclysmic final battle. It was a scene straight out of hell. The combined human armada, spearheaded by the Phantom Fleet, caught up to the planet killer just past Mars's orbit. Ships, as far as the eye could see, human and Evora, entangled in a lethal ballet of plasma and metal. His cybernetic hand clenched, servos whining. We hit that monstrosity with everything we had. Nukes, railguns, drones, you name it. But it just shrugged off our attacks like raindrops. Its shields were impenetrable. Jeffrey's eyes unfocused, seeing ghosts. All the while it kept coming, implacable, unstoppable. Its gravitational anomaly generator was spooling up, preparing to rip Earth to shreds. He paused, jaw working. That's when Captain Elena Ramirez made the call that saved us all but damned her and her crew. The cadet leaned in, scarcely breathing. What did she do? She ordered all ships to concentrate fire on a single point in the planet killer's shields, poured everything into that one spot until something finally gave. Jeffrey mimed an explosion with his hands. Then she punched her engines to flank and rammed her ship, the Retribution, straight into the gap. Carried a Kasaba howitzer warhead, nastiest thing we ever built. His voice dropped to a whisper. She detonated her core and the warhead at the same time, blew the planet killer open from the inside, sent it tumbling into the void in 1,000 flaming pieces. The cadet was aghast. Christ, she sacrificed her whole crew? Jeffrey nodded grimly. They knew what was at stake. Earth, the colonies, the survival of our entire species. Ramirez and her people, they gave everything to stop that monstrosity, to give us a chance. He sagged back in his chair, the weight of memory bearing down. With the planet killer gone, the Evora fleet cracked, scattered. We rallied and drove them back, system by system, planet by bloody planet. Jeffrey's voice was hollow. We won in the end, saved our worlds, broke the Evora, but the cost— He trailed off, shaking his head. Billions dead on both sides, worlds burned to cinders, an entire generation shattered by all they'd seen and done. And those of us who survived, who fought— His hand drifted to the gleaming metal grafted to his skull. We'd never be whole again. The cadet swallowed hard. But we're free, we survived, that counts for something, right? Jeffrey hauled himself to his feet, tossing a handful of credits on the bar. Maybe, but freedom has a price. For Ramirez, for her crew, for all of us. That price was blood. With that he turned and strode out, leaving the cadet to wrestle with the ghosts of a war that had forged and nearly destroyed humanity. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.